Assalamu alaikum. The last video we talked about Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, and we began talking about verse number 1. And slightly I covered verse number 2, and I mentioned that, just to recap, that even though God has commanded the Muslims to walk away from the treaty, the peace treaty with the idol worshippers in Mecca and also in Medina as well. And because the idol worshippers and the enemies of Islam has initiated various conducts and behaviors so that they are the one who broke the treaty with the Muslims with their deliberate attempts to conspire and undermine the Prophet's message in the Arabian Peninsula. So as a result of that, in response to that, God has asked his messenger and the Muslims to basically walk away from these peace treaties with the idol worshippers because they are unworthy of such treaties. So we stopped at, even though that God asked the Muslims to walk away or to declare they are free of obligation from these treaties with the non-believers, God at the same time commanded the Muslim not to immediately engage in violence with the idol worshippers. Rather, the next verse, number 2, command the Muslims to wait, to give a respite to these idol worshippers 4 months. And what's really interesting about this verse number 2, it communicates directly to the idol worshippers, because the first verse, it communicates directly to the Muslims, to the messenger of God and the Muslims. Whereas number 2, the communication or the address changes from the Muslim to the unbelievers. That is something worth noting, because here we have God the Almighty is also communicating to the idol worshippers, to the enemies of God's messenger. What we learn from this, when God turns towards the idol worshippers and says, "So travel the land for 4 months." This is a clear, direct communication to the enemies of Islam, telling them clearly, do not worry for this given time, travel the lands. فَسِيحُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And the interesting terminology was employed here is فَسِيحُوا. فَسِيحُوا. فَسِيحُوا derived from saha, which represents a wide space of movement, activities. And usually the Arabs also employ the root word saha in respect to the tourist. We say in Arabic, he is sa'ih, and the tourist has a full freedom of going about, enjoying, going to various places, engages in various activities, and what have you. And that's very wonderful to see the Quran employs a word which carries in it a meaning which is very, very interesting when it talks to the unbelievers. It's just telling them, feel free in the land, do whatever you want, whatever you like, and engage in anything you see fit. No harassment from the Muslims, no attacks from the Muslims, and be sure of that, because Allah is asking the Muslims to do that. So God is telling the unbelievers to feel free in the land for 4 months. And now I underline after why the verse suggests 4 months. Now, of course, the classical views has given many reasons for this, which mostly connected to the 4 months of the forbidden months, which called the months of Al-Hurum. Well, it may be so, but there is no indication in this particular verse that has anything to do with the prohibited months, that is Muharram and so on and so forth. It just says 4 months. And what I believe is, from my opinion, I could read into this that 4 months has something to do with the human psyche, with the possible process of psychological changes in someone's stand, belief, when they ponder about something. 4 months is to do with something that maybe has some marvels and effect on the human intellectual abilities. Because we're talking about God, the creator of all things, the creator of the human beings, the creator of our nervous system, the creator of our intellect. So he assigned 4 months. There must be something to do with the mechanism of the human process of thinking. And it might be possible that within those 4 months, some people, a lot of people, will eventually rethink their position in opposing the message of God, the calls for goodness. And that's what I think God giving the unbelievers 4 months to be like a tourist in the land, to have a full freedom in the land, do whatever you want, do whatever they like. They will not be harassed and attacked by the Muslims. And at the same time, God putting the unbelievers or the idol worshippers on notice and telling them, don't think that we are unable to continue to control your activities. Where it says, and know that you cannot escape Allah, that Allah will disgrace the unbelievers. So in these 4 months, you are given the freedom to do whatever you want, to organize themselves, reorganize yourselves. Maybe you could regroup yourself, thinking that you might be planning a bigger plan to undermine God's messenger and so on, and to finish the message of God, to finish him off on his message. But God is telling them, even though I am giving you 4 months to be free, to be unharmed, untouched by the Muslims, but remember that Allah, he cannot escape Allah's domain, power and might, and his control over all the affairs of man. So whatever you plan, whatever you do, whatever you anticipate or you hope to do, so you could have a better chance or another chance to bounce at the Muslims, is not going to work. So this is an interesting approach to the idea of giving these Muslims or the non-Muslims 4 months. So once again, just to recap, the 4 months, I believe, it has I would say, an existential relationship between the process of thinking of a human being and the possible rethinking, reconsidering, and maybe even changing. And this also takes me to the title of the surah. The surah title is Al-Tawbah, that is the repentance. And maybe there's a connection between the repentance and the 4 months that human beings can actually rethink, reconsider, so eventually they might ask for repentance. That's another dimension to the surah, that we know that the surah, it deals with the violence, self-defense, and there's a bloodshed as well, inevitable engagement or violent engagement with the non-Muslims. But at the same time, the surah is called Al-Tawbah, the repentance. So in the midst of all this violence and war and what have you, there is the gate of repentance. So that's why I believe the surah was called the repentance. So God knows best, and we know from history that a lot of people from the idol worshippers camp have actually reconsidered, and they joined and they became Muslims, and they became wonderful positive elements within the Muslim community. But that's a different issue right now. So God given them 4 months to rethink, to regroup, and what have you. At the same time, God is telling them not to be complacent and to easily forget that they are in the absence of God's knowledge and might. Now, hopefully, I will stop at this note, and I will continue on by next video with the verse number 3, so that we could appreciate this particular surah, which is called Surah At-Tawbah, and hopefully we will establish a general meaning of this particular surah, which eventually will help us in appreciating and understanding the controversial verse number 29 in Surah At-Tawbah, which is known to be the verse of Al-Jyzia. Thank you. Until next time.